Well, hi and welcome back to a boat called Wanda. So last update I showed you that I'd finished putting the new core into the deck. All of those 17 cutout sections that I'd cut up from the deck had been complete. So the core was laid back and then I'd put the new top skin laminate back on. So you might be wondering, where do we go from here? Now initially I did have ambitions of getting a new teak deck back onto Wanda. So a couple of months ago I did actually get a group to come out to quote me for a new teak deck, and that was using one of those prefabricated teak decks. Now that quote came in at about £13,000, which was just way too much money for me. When I think about it, I need new sails, new standing rigging, new fixed rigging. I probably need the engine serviced. I need new electrics, batteries. I want to replace the electronics and upgrade the navs system. So, you know, that £13,000 can go a long way with all those other things. I also did have a quick look at using a synthetic teak deck, and I came to the conclusion that I'm not going to have anything on the deck except for some non-skid. Now, that's a difficult decision because Hallberg-Rassys always have teak decks, and this will be one of the few Hallberg-Rassys that doesn't have anything like that. But that's the way it's going to go. I will actually get some teak in the cockpit though, and the grate, but that was about £2,000 I think, so that was about as much as I could go for. So in terms of what's next, what I need to do between now and getting that non-skid put down onto the deck, well, there's two activities I need to work on. The first one is I've got about 300 screw holes left that need to be plugged up and filled. There's probably about 1,000 to start with, and most of them have been removed because when I lifted up that top skin, all the screw holes came off with them. So what's left is about 300. The second thing that I need to work on is where I've got those 17 pieces of new deck around. Everywhere there's an interface between the old and the new, there's just a slight sort of bump. So I need to basically get all of that fed to get rid of those bumps so that I can then put down one final piece of laminate. And I've decided to put down one piece of 1200 GSM, so a really nice thick piece of coaxial, and I'll actually use West System epoxy to hold that down. Now of course that's pretty expensive compared to vinyl ester, but given that it's going to be the sort of top part of that deck, and you know, we'll take some knocks and some things dropped on it, I wanted it to be as robust and strong and reliable as possible. And given the fact that I've saved all this money on not putting a new teak deck down, then I think I can afford to do that. So that's what I'm going to do. I think that'll probably take me the next sort of 2 updates to get to that point, and then it'll be ready to get painted and get some anti-skid put down. So first up, let's get back on deck. Right, well here's one more milestone, and that is that I now have a complete deck that I can walk around, and I've got all the cutout pieces put in, re-laminated. I've started some fairing there, and this side as well. Just doing a little bit more post-curing here, all the way to the back. Okay, so the first thing I do is take a countersink bit and get a nice countersink happening on these. The second thing I do is take an 8mm drill and drill through that hole and drill out the cork. Okay, next step is just to take the vacuum and try and suck out any debris that's fit in those holes. Okay, then I give it a rinse out with some acetone. And then just suck out any acetone that's left, though it should evaporate pretty quickly. Then it's ready to be filled up with epoxy. So I'm using a syringe here, a 60mm syringe with some epoxy that's thickened with 404, and I've tried to keep it fairly sort of fluid so that it can be drawn up into the syringe. Obviously the thicker I can make it the better, but it needs to be thin enough to be able to work with it. The trick is to try and allow it to fill up from the bottom. Right, the next job on the list is to finish up with those stanchion bases. Now this is the stanchion base here. I've just done a little bit more work to it to prepare it, to really sort of open it up and get a nice clean cavity here that I can fill up. So there's a little bit of a design problem with these stanchion bases. Basically this sort of toe rail cavity, which is a cavity between the deck to hull joint, has been filled up with this material here. It's grey and it looks like some sort of compound filler. I don't believe it's epoxy. And you can see here that there's a few cracks in this. So what basically happens is when the stanchion takes a few hard knocks and it starts to move the base a bit, as soon as that base starts to move a little bit, it causes this material here to break up and crack, and then small pieces start to sort of fall down to the bottom, and then that sort of jams this side so that the side starts to get further apart and bulges like this, and then of course the base gets even more loose. So what I need to do is clamp this together to get this back to a nice straight sort of width, and then fill this up with a material that will basically keep the sides stuck in together and provide a good base for the stanchion base to be drilled into. So that's quite a large cavity to fill up, and whatever material I put in there, it needs to be really, really strong. So I've been trying to think through different approaches of how I could deal with this. If anybody has any ideas of their own or has seen somebody else deal with this sort of problem, please let me know. I'd really like to see how other people have solved this problem. Now the approach that I think I'm going to follow for this is to take some good old nice and thick coaxial mat, sort of roll it up, sink this into those cavities up there, and then saturate this with epoxy and hope that the epoxy penetrates this all the way through. Now before I go ahead and do this, in case it doesn't work out for a range of reasons, I thought I'd do a test first. And to assist with the test, I've actually created two boxes here to do a trial run on. Now these boxes are made out of 5mm laminate, which is actually the old top skin of the deck. So I've just epoxied these together, and that will basically give me the same depth dimension as that cavity up there. So I can take my little sort of test cavity, I can put my mat in and fill it up. There are two risks with this approach. One is that I won't get enough epoxy to actually penetrate through all of this cloth once it's wound up quite tightly. The second problem is there's so much depth of epoxy that could just generate too much heat, which might result in this being damaged or bulging out or even setting fire to the whole shed, which wouldn't be great. So yeah, I can do a test like this. I can also take that thermometer sensor, temperature sensor from the heating pad control unit I've got. I can stick that to the side and I can monitor it to see how much heat it's generating as that epoxy is curing. And then finally, once it's done, I can just cut this cavity in half and see a cross-section of the inside to make sure that the epoxy is actually going all the way through. Now, if this works out well, then I think this is going to be the best thing. It should have a lot of strength to hold those two sides of the toe rail together, and it should have a lot of stability and stiffness and strength to have the stanchion base drilled through this material and embedded in that. So I'm just about to put this together and see how that goes. Okay, well it's now time to cut open those test samples I made up yesterday to see what they look like in the middle. Right, so these are my two samples. Now the first one, I took some 1200 GSM, I just rolled it up and I sort of bunged it down the bottom of this cavity, and then I just poured pure epoxy over the top. Now I noticed that the epoxy level wasn't really sinking. I was kind of expecting it to sink down as it absorbed through the mat. Because it didn't do that, I got a feeling that it wasn't really being absorbed properly. I kind of pushed it around with a mixing stick a little bit and the level dropped a bit. But just as I suspected, hopefully as you can see there, the cloth is actually quite dry in the middle. So you can still sort of feel the fibres, it's not cured at all. So it's just really the outer edge that's the epoxy has penetrated. So this isn't going to work. The second sample I did, I took 600 this time and I laid it out on some cardboard and wet it through thoroughly, and then I rolled it up when it was wet, put it into the bottom of this cavity and then poured epoxy over the top. Now this one's actually worked out quite well, apart from the fact that there's a hole in the middle. But I can see that the epoxy has really absorbed all the way through, so just the fact that it was wet must have been conducive to getting the rest of the epoxy to sink through. So I think I'm going to use this approach, but I'll probably just put a little piece of dowel or something in the middle so that I can roll it up and not have any air there. So good, that was really worth doing, and I know how I'm going to fill those up now. So, mission accomplished. So the last couple of days, I've been too busy to take any video, but basically this is what I've been up to. Scraping and sanding and fairing and sanding and scraping and fairing over and over again. It's really slow going, and this is the part that I was most concerned about. But yeah, so far it's going okay. I'll probably shoot a little bit more footage of how I'm doing that next update, but for now this is what I'm up to, and this is how much I've done in the last couple of days. So this section up here is the part that Anthony's done, and he's got quite a large skimming board, so these sections are sort of done in probably 1 metre pieces, and as you can see these look really professionally done and well executed. And then I've done this side deck. I've been plugging away at this now for a couple of days, and it's not quite as good as the front. It's taken me a long time to get this far as well. But anyway, I'm getting there. And the other thing that I've completed for this week is I've done the first of these stanchion bases where the toe rail's been opened up, and you can see there, I mean it's not pretty, but there's my roll of 600 GSM quadaxial mat, which has been rolled up and stuffed into this cavity and then filled up with epoxy. And so I should be able to take this clamp off over the next couple of days, and I'm really keen to see what this is like. Now obviously I need to fair over the top of it, and I might wrap some fiberglass tape around that as well. But that's the first of 3 of those done. So I reckon at this rate, by this time next week, next update, I should have finished all of that fairing, which will be really exciting because then I can make a start to putting that final layer of mat down on the deck using epoxy. And this here is the mother of all epoxy containers. Got 25 litres of this stuff. So that'll be really great when I can start putting that final layer down, because then it means I can go and get Wanda painted, and that will be the end of a very, very, very large project. So very exciting. So I'll leave the update at this point. So hopefully next week I can show you, I should have those stanchion bases finished. Be interesting to take that clamp off and see how well the toe rail has gripped together. Fairing done, and hopefully made a start to the top layer. So thanks for watching. Come back next week and have a look at what I'm up to. I'll see you then.